Uh, Before I get into the body of the sermon text, allow me just to make a couple of pastoral notes about this text. The first thing I want to say is that this text, like many texts in, particularly in the Old Testament, take place in the context of war or violence that is occurring. And we spiritualize this story and many of the stories that talk about war or violence, and talk about them in metaphors and similes, and talk about them as relating to spiritual concepts, which is much of what we will do even in this sermon. But as we do that, I want to make sure that we do not lose track of the fact that this text is talking about actual war, talking about actual violence. That people's lives are on the line in this text. That to say that there are times when war may be necessary. There are times when, in order to defend freedom, in order for people to live free, it may be necessary to take up arms and fight. However, I believe that fighting is never the preferential option for people of God. That in all situations where we can peaceably protect our freedoms, we can and should try to do so. And so I want to be careful not to glorify the violence of this text or lift it up as a way of neutralizing us or making us numb to the violence that is and continues to occur in our society. The second thing I want to note about this is just to point out that this text on a surface reading can appear to promote religious-based violence. That is to say that on the surface of the text, without careful study, it is possible to assume that the difference between the Philistines and the Israelites is a difference in the name of the God whom they worship.
All right.
That the Philistines who worship Baal and the Israelites who worship Yahweh, that the difference is the name of God whom they worship. And that very thin explanation of this text and other texts like this have been used to condone violence against our Jewish brothers and sisters, our Muslim brothers and sisters, and even people outside of the Abrahamic faith tradition, our Buddhist, Hindu, Sikh, and other brothers and sisters who have deep faith that in many ways differs from that of our own. And I would just lift up for you from a hermeneutical context, a close reading of the text, that what is at stake here is not about the name of the God who is worshipped. This is not a fight over religious identity. It is a fight over the purpose for which God calls people to live. That the God that the Philistines worshipped believed that it was important, in fact necessary, for child sacrifice in order to appease their God. And so the Philistines having control over dominion over Israel would mean that the children of the Israelites would be subject to being taken and executed, so-called in the name of God. And that the God of Israel, Yahweh, the God who we believe is the God of Jesus Christ, the God who we worship, my brothers and sisters, is a God who stands up and fights for all those who are oppressed. And not just those who worship God who are oppressed, but all of those everywhere, which is why Israel is commanded not just to promote freedom within their own ranks, but to extend that freedom to the strangers that live therein. And so what is happening here is not just the difference in the name of God, but it's a difference in purpose. It is violent extremists on one side bent in killing innocent people versus people whose religion is calling them to live peaceably and to liberate all of those who are oppressed. So I just want to state that at the outset of this sermon, so that just in case you may have misheard or been mistaught, or somebody, you hear somebody preaching this in ways that want to count you to that, you can make that mental correction in your mind and have a deeper understanding of what this text is really about.
Amen.
I have only just a minute, only 60 seconds in it. Forced upon me, I can't refuse it. Didn't seek it, didn't choose it, but it's up to me to use it. I must suffer if I lose it, give account if I abuse it. Just a tiny little minute, but eternity is in it. This poem, entitled Just a Minute, is written by Reverend Dr. Benjamin Elijah Mays, one-time president of Morehouse College, and it describes the opportunity that we have each and every day of our lives. Our days are filled with minutes, friends and family, time with which we must choose what we will do. Now I know it is easy to look at the demands that are placed upon us, to look at the expectations of others that may weigh on us, to look at the 100 or thousands or seemingly millions of directions that we may feel we are pulled in and think that our time is really not our own. But what this poem reminds us, my brothers and sisters, is that at the end of the day, it is our choice what we do with the time that we have.
Yes.
We make the consent of our soul. We make the agreement with our time, how we handle it, my brothers and sisters. The poem lets us know that with each passing minute, God provides us with an opportunity. The question is, what will we do with that opportunity? Opportunities abound, my brothers and sisters. They are everywhere. They are all around us. Part of the challenge is seeing those opportunities that may exist. Part of the reason why I believe it is important for us to gather together as a people of God and not only worship together, but fellowship together, to engage in conversation together, is because oftentimes there are people around us who can help us discern what is happening with us, who can help us to see opportunities that may be there, that may be hidden from our sight because we've been looking at the situation for too long, or we've been thinking about it too hard. Somebody with a fresh set of eyes can look and see and give advice that can help clarify the opportunities that may be present with us. My brothers and sisters, opportunities arise. Not only do we need to be able to see them, but we must decide what we do with those opportunities. Every time, my brothers and sisters, I look in the news, I see people seeing opportunities, but having a failure of nerve or a failure of courage to do anything about those opportunities. My brothers and sisters, yesterday or this weekend, we saw the latest in a series of protests around climate change, where people in Colorado took to the streets to march to say that the way that we are treating our environment, particularly the way that this president has rolled back restrictions that we have been working towards over the past half a century, that we have mustered up the political will to pass in order that we might save our planet from the human-made disaster that we are creating in our own environment. And that literally, as the heart of our country is on fire, burning up natural resources, that it will take generations, if not centuries, to replenish. Brothers and sisters, as this is happening, our president and other presidents around the world, instead of leaning in to figuring out how can we do all that we can to minimize the impact, the negative impact that we are having on our environment, are doing the exact opposite and are creating more harm and allowing companies and corporations to do more damage to the environment, or rolling back the few restrictions that we've been able to pass, my brothers and sisters, and are denying that the science of climate change is even real. With logic, my brothers and sisters, that would embarrass even the most junior of students. My brothers and sisters, we have people who say that the fact that there is snow on the ground in some places around the country indicates that there is no such thing as global warming. As if they believe, or they can convince others to believe, that temperature and climate are the same thing. My brothers and sisters, there are people who refuse to acknowledge the truth that is happening, and even though the opportunities continue to present themselves, people refuse to do anything with them. They turn a blind eye, they wash their hands, they act as if they are helpless to make changes, my brothers and sisters, even though the opportunities present itself. Sometimes, my brothers and sisters, we look past opportunities because we try to sanctify our unwillingness to take advantage of opportunities as if God has something to do with it. We put our lack of courage or our lack of will, we try to blame it on God, my brothers and sisters, where there are people who will say that we should not worry about what's happening to the planet because God created the world in 7 days, and if God wants to, God can fix the problems, my brothers and sisters, which is the most ridiculous, anti-biblical, anti-theological statements I have heard in my short life, my brothers and sisters. The fact is, if you look at the text, the Bible says that when God created the world and said it was good, and created people and said that they were good, they gave them stewardship over the earth, that God gave it to them and said to tend the earth, to steward it, to be careful how you treat it, to make sure that you nurture and cultivate it, my brothers and sisters, not to treat it any kind of way, but just like the servants in the parable that Jesus tells that have to give an account for what they have done, we will have to give an account for what we have done with our planet. And the fact that in the last 50 to 75 years, we have done more to damage our planet than has been done in the 1,000 years of human history that predated us, my brothers and sisters, is something that our generation is going to have to give an account for before the Lord. And all of those who had the power to make changes, all of those who had the power to create opportunities for us to move in a different directions will have to answer for their inactions. They cannot sanctify their lack of action. The same thing is true about this issue of gun control, my brothers and sisters. Every time for the more than 250 mass shootings that we have experienced in the United States this year, my brothers and sisters, each of those is an opportunity for lawmakers to come together and to ask seriously the question, how can we come together around sensible gun reform laws? How can we make sure that people do not have access to guns that have so much firepower greater power in them that you can take out 50 people before anybody can respond. How do we create sensible laws, not to take guns out of people's hands, but to limit the caliber and power of guns that everyday citizens have access to? How can we do things that make sense, my brothers and sisters? But there is an unwillingness to. There's an unwillingness to develop the moral courage to turn down the money that the NRA pumps in political candidates and into their campaigns. There is a lack of political will to stand up and say that the challenges that we are experiencing are opportunities for us to do something differently, my brothers and sisters. But we know we can because it happened in the late 1960s, early 1970s, when the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense decided that they would walk into a government building just carrying guns, not pointing them at anybody, not threatening anybody, but just having them on their backs. Then the same party that is saying we can't do anything about gun control now acted real quick to enact gun control then. Very quickly they decided that they need to do something about the presence of guns and limit who had access to it. We know that it is possible to do it, but people lack the political will, even as our children are dying because of it. Amen. If I had more time, or brothers and sisters, if I really had time to preach this the way I want to, I might make the case that people who refuse to enact laws to protect our children from these dangerous weapons are much like the Philistines who worship a God that sacrifices their children to the altar of Baal. I might argue that people are sacrificing our children at the altar of the NRA, and whether you spell your idol God Baal or spell it NRA, it doesn't matter how you spell it. We need a reformation. We need a revival. We need a revolution to stop the killing of innocent children for the sake of very narrow political interests. But that's a different sermon. I'm not preaching that one today, brothers and sisters. What I'm saying today is that God provides us with opportunity. The question is, what will we do with it? Last week, when we looked at this text, we talked from the subject, show up. God is calling us to show up, my brothers and sisters. And we talked about how David, who was the youngest of his brothers, David, who was considered the outcast of the family, David, who when the other brothers were doing important things, was minding the few sheep he had there in the countryside. David, who when the prophet Samuel came looking for somebody to anoint king, and God told him that the king was going to be at Jesse's house, and Jesse invited all of his sons to come and meet the prophet, they forgot to invite David. And it wasn't until Samuel looked at each of David's sons and said, not one of these is the person God has selected king. Do you have any others? And they said, oh yeah, there's David who's out there with the sheep. Somebody go get David. David, my brothers and sisters, was called to show up in the middle of one of the biggest crises that the people of Israel were facing, my brothers and sisters. But the fact that David showed up was only half of the story. But once he showed up, he had to step up. In other words, my brothers and sisters, that being present in the middle of pain, being present in the middle of somebody else's crisis is important, but it is just as important that we see the opportunities that are there as an opportunity for us to step up. If David had simply showed up on the scene and been present and witnessed what had happened and not taken the opportunity to insert himself into a leadership role, my brothers and sisters, then this story would not be worthy of being in the Bible. But David was there. He saw the opportunity that was before him, and he made a decision that he had to step up. So, my brothers and sisters, I believe that every day around us, if we pay attention close enough, if we show up in the community and show up with our family and show up with the people on our jobs and show up with the people in school, as we show up, my brothers and sisters, we will see opportunities there that are calling for the people of God, that are calling for the church of God, that are calling for us to step up into those with the presence of God, my brothers and sisters. And the question is, what will we do with the opportunity? Will we take it? Will we step up? Will we step out on the faith that God is calling us to, or will we let the opportunity pass us by? Looking at this text, my brothers and sisters, I want to look at three things that helped David to step up, that might help us to step up, my brothers and sisters. The first thing that I want to note out of the story is that the opportunities that God provides are not limited by our resume. The opportunities that God provides are not limited by our resume. My brothers and sisters, no one who looked at David's resume prior to this point would have seen, would have thought that David would have been qualified to be the warrior to stand up for Israel in the face of this giant that was threatening the freedom and well-being of this nation. If they had had an election based on qualifications and credentials, David would not have been the person elected to be the champion of Israel. That's right. My brothers and sisters, because David's qualifications did not seem to rank in comparison to the others that were there. In fact, we know this is the case, my brothers and sisters, because the Bible said that Saul knew David by this point. David had been the musician for Saul. He had been Saul's personal musician anytime that Saul began to be plagued with nightmares, that he would call for music to be played, and they would call to Bethlehem to call David from the mountainside where he was watching his sheep to come to Jerusalem to play the lyre for the king, so that the king's mind would be at ease. So David was in Saul's inner camp. But when it was time to go to war, Saul does not call David for the war. Right. As Saul is calling all of the people in the nation who he thinks are eligible and able to fight, as they are commencing with the draft of people to come and stand up for Israel, David is ignored again from this list. And so David is free to go back and forth between the palace and home as he sees fit, because nobody thinks, not Saul, not David's brothers, not David's father thinks that he is important enough or talented enough or skilled enough to step up and fight for Israel. But yet, in spite of that fact, my brothers and sisters, in spite of the fact that nobody thought David was qualified for this, it is God that has called David to step up into this moment. And David, seeing the moment that is in front of him, recognizes God's hand at work and volunteers himself to step into it, my brothers and sisters. What I'm simply trying to tell you was that even though David was overlooked by his father, ridiculed by his brothers, considered only good enough to be a musician to the king, but not good enough to fight in the king's army, God still provided this opportunity for David to step up into, my brothers and sisters, which is my way of saying that no matter what it looks like on the surface, no matter what your resume says, my brothers and sisters, that your resume cannot define the opportunities that God has for your life. LinkedIn or Career Builder cannot create an algorithm that will predict the opportunities that God has for your life. I want you to know, my brothers and sisters, that doctors cannot surgically remove the opportunities God has for your life. Police cannot arrest the opportunities that God has for your life. Judges cannot sentence the opportunities that God has for your life. Lawyers cannot file suit against the opportunities that God has for your life. UPS and FedEx cannot mishandle the opportunities that God has for your life. Firefighters cannot put out the opportunities that God has for your life. There is no pre-existing condition that will disqualify you from the opportunities that God has for your life. There is nothing and no one that can stop the opportunities that God has for your life. I want you to know, my brothers and sisters, God has opportunities for you, and it's not based on what you have done or based on other people's assumptions of what you are capable of. God knew you before you were born, and God knows that there is greatness inside of you, even if no one else can see it or understand it, my brothers and sisters. And so nobody can stop the opportunities that God has for your life. Won't you help me preach this thing? Won't you turn to your neighbor and say, neighbor, God has opportunity for your life. Now I'm looking at your neighbor and they're not sure that they believe you, my brothers and sisters. So won't you put your best fourth Sunday in the month of September on? Look at your neighbor like you're glad to see them, like you're convinced what you're saying is true, and put your best preaching voice on and say, neighbor, God has opportunity for your life. I want you to know, my brothers and sisters, it's true. God has opportunity after opportunity for your life. And there is nothing that can stop the opportunity. Do you know how I know? Because as I was praying about this, God gave me some divine revelation. God said, Nelson, I put your opportunity with two bodyguards on either side to protect you. One's name is Grace. The other's name is Mercy. And so goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life. And if goodness and mercy are following me all the days of my life, that means they have my opportunities in tow with them. And so every day of my life, God is bringing opportunity after opportunity. That's why the songwriter says, great is thy faithfulness, morning unto morning, by morning new mercies I see, because each new mercy is a new opportunity that God is bringing to you, my brothers and sisters, to step up. You cannot stop God's opportunities because it comes on the waves of the morning sun, my brothers and sisters. It floats on the breeze of the morning wind, my brothers and sisters. Every time you open your eyes, you are seeing opportunities. Every time you take a step, you're walking into opportunities. Every time you raise your hand, you're reaching out for opportunities. Opportunities are all around you, and you can't stop what God has for you.
Amen.
The second thing I want to look at in this text, my brothers and sisters, is that even though God brings opportunities to you, and even though God will bring you to opportunities, it is up to you to walk through the door that God has provided for you. My brothers and sisters, we believe that God has given each and every one of us free will. And free will means that we have to make the decision to say yes to what God is providing for us. My brothers and sisters, there is an old saying that you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. My brothers and sisters, it is the same with us. That God can lead you to opportunities, but God will not make you choose the opportunities. When David came to bring a care package to his brothers and get a token from them to let his father know that he was okay, David was confronted with the opportunity that David could have acted like every other person around him was acting, and sat back and looked at the giant and said, I don't know who's going to go fight the giant. David could have acted like everybody else acted and said, these people have been here longer. They have been doing this before I got here. And if they haven't stepped up to fight, then I should not step up and fight. David had every excuse in the world of why he should not step up, my brothers and sisters, except for David was convinced that God was working in David, my brothers and sisters. And so David saw this not as an opportunity to wring his hands or complain about how nobody is fighting the giant. David saw this as an opportunity for him to step up into the gap where nobody else is. My brothers and sisters, and so the same is true for us, that God can provide and lead us to opportunity after opportunity, but it is us who have to decide to walk into the door. My brothers and sisters, God will not force opportunity down your throat. You have to make a decision if you want a new job to put out applications. You have to make a decision to go to interviews. You have to make a decision to accept the job, my brothers and sisters. For our students, you have to make a decision to go to class, or even if you're forced to go to class, you have to make a decision to pay attention when you are in class. You have to make a decision to do your homework and not just get it done to check it off, but to process it and think about it so that you can actually learn from it. You have to make the decision, my brothers and sisters. Life is full of decisions that we have to make. God can open as many doors as God wants for you, but if you are standing in the hallway and refuse to walk in, my brothers and sisters, then it does not matter how many doors open. You have to make a decision that you're going to walk through at least one of the doors that God has opened. David made a decision, my brothers and sisters, not just to talk about what was happening, but when David was called in to talk to Saul, and Saul was asking David, why are you asking about this? David said, don't worry about this anymore, King. Take this off of your mind. I will go and fight the giant. It doesn't matter if you think I'm qualified. It doesn't matter what my resume looks like. I will step up and fight this giant. If nobody else will, I will do it, my brothers and sisters. And God is looking for people who will step up, who will look and see the needs that need to take place and decide that they will step into the gap. I cannot tell you that's why I am so excited about the Feeding Avondale ministry that this church is birthing, that is about to take place, my brothers and sisters, because food insecurity in Avondale has been an issue for a long time. And it would be easy for us as Beloved Community Church, as probably the latest of the churches to worship in Avondale, number 53 of 53 churches to worship in this space, the newest and the youngest and one of the smallest churches in this space, to say, well, if the big churches haven't done this, then we can't do it. If the churches that have been here for 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100 years haven't done this, then we shouldn't do it. If the churches that have their own buildings haven't done this, then why should we do it? If churches that have more people or more money aren't doing this, then why should we do it? But, my brothers and sisters, there has been conviction that has stirred in the hearts of people here who say there is a need in the community that this church exists in, that we meet every Sunday to worship in. And we can't talk about a God who meets the needs of the people if we are unwilling to meet the needs of the people. And so it doesn't matter if none of the other 52 churches decide to join us on this work, my brothers and sisters. We are stepping up to the opportunity that God is calling us to, because God has placed something inside of us, and we aren't just going to watch it sail by. We're going to step up and grab it. so much shouting, so much praising, so much running around, talking about the grabbing of blessings or grabbing of God's goodness. God's got a blessing with your name on it. All you got to do is reach up and grab it, grab it and grab it, name it and claim it. All you have to do is reach out and grab God's blessings, my brothers and sisters. And maybe there are some blessings out there that all you have to do is grab. But while you're grabbing blessings, why don't you grab an opportunity as well? While you're grabbing blessings, why don't you grab a ministry need as well? While you're grabbing blessings, why don't you at least grab a prayer request as well? While you're grabbing blessings, grab an opportunity to be a blessing to someone else. God has opportunities. All we have to do is step up. The last thing, my brothers and sisters, that David knows in this text that is important for us to remind ourselves is that when we step up for God, God will step up inside of us. When we step up for God, God will not leave us alone, but God will step up inside of us and step up with us. David knows this when he says that I'm going to step up against this Philistine and the same God who delivered me from the teeth of the lion and the same God who delivered me from the paw of the bear will deliver me from this Philistine. My brothers and sisters, David knows that if he takes the step for God, he will not be stepping by himself. Though it may look like to everyone else that when David walks on the battlefield, it is only David walking on this battlefield to face the lion, but David is able to see what other people cannot see, that he is not walking out there on the battlefield by himself, but that God is walking out there inside of him and with him, my brothers and sisters. And I know we're not at this point of the text yet, but I just got to remind you that when David walks out there on the battlefield, the Bible says that David carries 5 smooth stones. He puts them in his slingshot and he winds it up, my brothers and sisters, and he lets that rock go. And I heard an old preacher say that when he let that rock go, he let that rock go into God's hands. And God carried that rock beyond the shield of Goliath, beyond the sword of Goliath, beyond the spear of Goliath. And God implanted that rock firmly in the lion's head. Now, I don't know if that's what God did or not, my brothers and sisters, but the point is, David knew when he stepped out there that God was stepping out there with him. And I want you to know, my brothers and sisters, that when you step out on faith, when you have the courage to take God at God's word, when you have the courage not just to show up, but to step up, that God is stepping up with you, my brothers and sisters, that you aren't stepping alone, but the Lord is right there stepping with you. I know this, my brothers and sisters, because every time I read my Bible, I see another example of how God is stepping with people who take a step of faith. When Abraham took a step of faith to leave his father's house, God stepped out there with him to take him to a land that God would show. When Moses took a step out of his exile to go back to deliver the people, God stepped up with Moses to make sure that Pharaoh let God's people go. When Joshua stepped into leadership after Moses retired, God stepped up with Joshua so that when they marched 7 times around the wall came tumbling down. When Gideon stepped out of the wine press and stepped out on God, with God, that God stepped up with Gideon. And so even though Gideon's team was outnumbered more than 100 to 1, God caused pandemonium to happen with God's enemies so that Gideon would get the victory. And every time, my brothers and sisters, people have stepped
when the nation was being triple teamed by three nations that were coming to try to take their land and take their resources, God sent a wave of angels in front of the people to cause a distraction so that when they heard the choir singing as the soldiers were marching, they thought that somebody had snitched and they fought each other so that when Israel came, all they had to do was show up and claim the victory, my brothers and sisters. When they said that Daniel could not pray to Daniel's God, Daniel kept praying. He stepped out on faith. And even though they threw Daniel in a lion's den, God stepped into the lion's den with Daniel so that the lions did not touch Daniel while he was in the lion's den. When they told everybody to bow down at the altar that King Nebuchadnezzar had created, and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego took a step with God and said, "We will not bow down." God stepped with them into the fiery furnace so that when the king looked in, the king said, "We put 3 people in, but now I see 4. And the 4th looks like the Son of God." My brothers and sisters, God keeps stepping up when we step up. God continues to step up each time we step up. And God even does one better, my brothers and sisters, because when people stop stepping up, God said, "I'll show you what stepping up looks like. Let me step out of heaven. Let me step down into earth. Let me walk with you and talk with you. Let me step up with the outcasts. Let me step up with the lepers. Let me step up with people who you consider poor and unworthy. And let me show you what love looks like. Let me show you what mercy looks like. Let me show you what God's presence looks like. Let me show you what community looks like." And when the Romans got tired of Jesus stepping up, because people realized that they could step up to the Roman oppression, they crucified Jesus. They put him on a cross. He hung there from the 6th to the 9th hour. He died between 2 thieves. But even on the cross, Jesus stepped up. My brothers and sisters, he stepped up and prayed for forgiveness for those who were crucifying him. He stepped up and opened the doors of the kingdom for somebody who was dying next to him, my brothers and sisters. And they took him off of the cross. And they buried him in a borrowed tomb. But Jesus had one more step up left in him, my brothers and sisters. And so early, Sunday morning, just about the break of day, Jesus stepped up out of the grave and said, "I've got all power in my hands. I've got all power in my hands. Power so that you can step up." And I just want to know, my brothers and sisters, when all God has done for you, I bet if you look back over your life, you can see places where God has stepped up in your life. And so I want to know, when all that God has done for you, with the ways God has made for you, with the doors that God has opened for you, with how God has stepped up for you, I just want to know, is there somebody here today who's willing to say, "God, because you stepped up for me, I'm going to step up for you. Because you stood up for me, I'm going to stand up for you. Because you walk with me, I'm going to walk with you." If you believe it, if you're willing to do it, won't you put your hands together and give God praise in here? God, I'm going to step up.
Amen.
Hallelujah.
Amen.
Thank you, God.
Thank you, Lord.
Worthy Jesus. Hallelujah.
God is calling us, friends and family, brothers and sisters, to show up.
Yes, Lord.
And to step up.
Yes.
We have a practice, my brothers and sisters, that we call response to the word. which is our way of acknowledging that God doesn't just speak through me, because I'm the one in front of you with the microphone, but that God desires to speak to and through each and every one of us. And so we take a moment as a part of our worship to say, God, what is it that you are saying to me? What is it that you are calling me